Hey writers, it's Megan Barnhart in All Writers Welcome, and today I'm going to talk about creating compelling characters. And I'm doing something a little bit different tonight. I'm really excited. One of our fearless writers, Sydney Higgins, has loaned me her character to talk about. So I'm going to actually walk you through the specifics of a character, and we'll look at what are the things that Sydney as an author is doing right in building her character, and then I'm going to talk you through some of the questions that she brought up. And the first thing I want to say is that I recently saw a link for like a freebie about character creation, and I was like, oh, that should be interesting. And I opened it, and it was 3 pages, and it was jam packed full of all of these questions about characters. And I was skimming through it, and I thought, gosh, some of these questions I would not know how to answer about myself. I don't know what my least favorite song is. I mean, it probably changes from day to day. I don't know if I could name my least favorite food. There were so many questions. And I think there's a myth circulating that the more you know about your character, the easier it will be to write the character, or the more other people, like other readers, will love your character. And there's a disconnect there because you might know a lot about your character and have created a really interesting character, but if you're not sure how to animate your character and put her into your story, then other people won't get a chance to connect. So, okay, I want to start with what Sydney is doing that I love. So she sent me some details about her story and about her character. And what I love that she's done is given a life framework and like a who is this person in the world. We have an occupation, an age, kind of like where she is in life and what she's been through so far, which is important. But more than that, I love that what Sydney has done is given her character a reason for existing. So I'm torn because I want to like give you specifics, but I don't want to steal the thunder for when Sydney's book is finished. We're all going to read it. Okay. But she's writing about a character who's been through a traumatic experience and has PTSD as a result. And that is a very specific motivation for writing. So having a character who's going through a particular experience is different from, oh, I know I want to write about somebody and he's a mountain climber, or I know I want to write about somebody and she's a school teacher. What do you want from your character is a really important question. Oh, something's wrong with the volume. You can't hear anything. Oh, can somebody else help me out? Are we having volume? If you can hear me, let me know. Raise your hand. Okay. Or make a comment. If you can hear me, please make a comment. If you can't hear me, make a comment. I guess if you can't hear me, you wouldn't be able to make a comment. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the feedback that it's fixed. All right. I do love talking to myself, but it's always nice to have other people hear me if I mean to talk to them. Okay, so that difference between what's my character's occupation and what is my character's reason for existing in my novel is really key. So if you don't already know what that is, if you don't know why you want to write about this particular character, that's the very first thing to examine. And this brings me to a larger point. A lot of writers report that their characters come to life and take over. And they may start saying, like telling you what to write and what you should say. And if that happens, I think that's really, really cool. Like that's the kind of magic that a lot of people who write wish for. But before it happens, you need to set some ground rules. Because what's the point of writing a story that just flows through you without there being something you want to say? So even if you get to that cool place where you just start hearing the dialogue and you're like, oh yeah, that's totally what Charlie would say. Oh yeah, absolutely. You want it to be within the framework of this is the story you want to tell. So I love that Sydney has given her character this particular challenge. She wants to write about somebody overcoming PTSD. All right, then I want to not discourage you from going through and looking through all those details. So Sydney knows what kind of music her character likes in general. There's no what is your absolute least favorite song, right? But in general, what kind of music does my character listen to? What kind of food does she eat? What does she really dislike about the world? And Sydney, I do have to share this detail because it just tickled me so much. This character dislikes players and Lord of the Rings. And I was wondering if there was a connection there. And I was thinking like maybe those hobbits, they're such players. I thought my hobbit was going to give me a ring. Turns out he just threw it in the volcano. I don't know if there was a connection, but I thought that was kind of tickling. So I'm not discouraging you from having details, but all of those details without a purpose, that becomes a really interesting character study, but that's different from a story. All right. So the questions that Sydney was asking, oh wait, I forgot a really important thing. The other thing that Sydney has done that I super applaud her for, that's fantastic, is in addition to having the situation her character's in, she has the motivation laid out. And the motivation is that she wants to get her life back after the event that caused the trauma and the PTSD. So she is on a clear path, which means that Sydney knows the arc of her story, even if she's not sure of the details. And this would be a great place to bring in one of her questions, which was about how should this character end up? And because the traumatic event was related to being betrayed in a romance, the question was, should the character end up single or should she end up with somebody? And the answer is, it doesn't matter what literally happens to her so much as what happens to her emotionally. And you can clearly imagine this if you just think of the scenario where the character who was hurt at the end ends up in a relationship, but it's another bad relationship or one that's going to hurt her, right? We would all agree that's not a happy ending. On the other hand, she could end up single and miserable, and then we would know that wasn't a happy ending either. So I think the question of, is she going to overcome the trauma and get together with somebody else, or is she going to overcome the trauma and be by herself, is totally up to you, Sydney. And you might just think about, is there a particular niche you want to write for? If you feel like you want to speak to single people, many of whom get frustrated that, there's kind of this message in our culture that you have to go find your partner, and, happy ever after always means finding one other person to cohabitate with. Maybe it would be a neat, something that sets your novel apart to have your character find herself and just be happy with who she is. So it totally depends on the audience you want to go for, or what's important to you, what you want to show. The kind of story that you would like to read could come into play. But I can imagine it being a happy ending in either of those scenarios, because she could be in a relationship and we would see the contrast of how different it is from the really bad situation she was in previously, or she could be by herself and she could just be loving how she is her own, she trusts herself and she's perfectly happy as is. So that's, I hope that's not too frustrating an answer, but it really is up to you. And the only important thing I would say is make sure that we as readers know she feels super content with how she is. Even if, she's going to have further adventures, right? That she's gotten to a place where she feels really good. Okay, another big question, and this is the crux of the story, would be that you weren't sure how she was going to get over the trauma and what makes her strong enough to get her life on track. And that's a really, really big question. But I think it could be answered in so many ways. And I think as long as it feels real, people will respond to it. I read a book recently that I can't say too many bad things about because I didn't realize what genre it was when I read it. And it's a genre I don't particularly care for, so that's on me. But in it, there was a character whose sister had died, and the character had been very traumatized, and she developed panic attacks. And then in one magical date with one totally unrealistic guy, all her trauma was resolved, right? You know, like, oh, she cried and then it was all over. And I was like, oh, that feels really like awful to give that message to people. If you just, you know, meet the right guy and cry on his shoulder, your trauma will be resolved. So, you know, that to me felt really icky. But I guess like the first part of resolving her trauma would be giving us more of a window into it. And I want to recommend a book, Waking the Tiger. I'll have to get the exact title. Anyway, there's this kind of therapy that's being really successfully used for soldiers and other people with post-traumatic stress disorder, people who've been in accidents, who've suffered abuse, all kinds of trauma. And like what your character, Laura, has gone through would definitely fall under the category. And it's about like readjusting the nervous system. Anyway, his book, and I'll get the link to it, would give some great examples of how people feel when they're reliving the trauma, like what happens when you are in that moment. And so, Sydney, you might have some of your own experiences to bring to it, or you might have friends, or you may have a very specific inspiration for writing. And so maybe you already have background knowledge here. But I would say then you can walk your readers through how your character feels when she's in the trauma. And then that will help us empathize with her. And then as you draw her out of it, we'll understand why it's a big deal. Okay, in terms of drawing her out of it, there might be some motivation. And you've made her a nurse, I believe. Yes, which is so awesome, because here is somebody who's a health practitioner who needs to restore her own health in this particular way. So maybe there's a patient she works with who really inspires her, either positively or negatively, right? Like she's, oh my gosh, if Larry in room 7 can do it, then so can I. And she starts working on things. Or if there's a patient who isn't healing, or there's a negative motivation. I don't want to be like so-and-so, or it was so sad what happened to so-and-so, and I want to, work harder. So think about a motivation there, and then also think about the support that would be available at a hospital. If you put her in a situation where she starts to do some healing and starts to, she gets fed up of feeling powerless, and so she tries to explore ways to get out of it. And then, of course, you can give her a situation where she does have to stand up for herself. And it doesn't have to be the same trauma. It doesn't have to be, it could be that she's attacked. And I think maybe you have something like that she's going to get attacked and she'll have to stand up for herself. That could totally work. It could be something smaller. For people with PTSD, even a minor, or what seems like a minor incident to others, can totally trigger all those same old feelings. And it can, just be like, it takes the most courage to stand up to it. So again, sorry, an annoying answer. The what is not, it could just be anything. You have so many options. So what you might do is, first of all, brainstorm on her motivation. Just make a mind map, or however you like to brainstorm, do a bullet point list, write in a journal, and just ask okay, what are all the things that might make her go, enough is enough? What is going to be her turning point when she's like, nope, not living like this anymore? And just go crazy on that. And then once you have that moment, then you can start thinking towards, well, what's the scene I want that would give her the challenge to grow out of it, and then work backwards from that and just make sure it's realistic for your readers that she would be able to grow that much. And that might mean she has support. It might mean she has other people in her life who she maybe it's the medical staff where she works as a nurse that are going to give her some tips. Okay, speaking of support, you asked about her best friend too, and you're thinking you're not sure how they can get along, and they're very different, and the dialogue is feeling stilted. And what came to mind when I was thinking about that was the Golden Girls, because Blanche and Rose and Dorothy and Sophia are all very different, and they're thrown together by circumstance. Right? They need one another to pay rent, but they also they connect in some very core ways, even though they disagree about a lot of things. So I would recommend with the best friend, figure out what they connect over, right? For the Golden Girls, it's cheesecake and bashing men, or complaining about men. So figure out what Laura and who is her best friend? Beth. Figure out what oh, sorry, Lauren. I was calling her Laura. I apologize. Figure out what Lauren and Beth really connect about and what draws them together. And people connect for all number of reasons. They connect around passions, they connect around vices, they connect around shared experiences, especially troubling shared experiences, traumatic shared experiences. Does Beth have something in her past that helps her empathize with Lauren and the betrayal she went through? Is there like a shared understanding and sisterhood there? If so, they could jibe at one another and talk about like, oh, those jeans are so out of style, and I can't believe you dated a guy with, 7 nose rings, whatever it is. They could be disagreeing about the small stuff, but we know they're connected. You could show us those moments where they're connecting about the big stuff. Okay. So Sydney, did you have like further questions you want to ask while we're live right now? Is there other stuff that's coming up from the things I've been saying, or did other people who are on the call want to chime in and give suggestions? While you guys are thinking what your questions or comments might be, I want to kind of do a recap. You do not have to know, like, rest assured, you do not have to know every single detail about your character's life in order to write a compelling character. You will learn more about your character as you start writing, and the biggest favor you can do for yourself is to start by getting your clear motivation, your why, which will also inform like what kind of character you're writing about. Okay, so awesome, Sydney. I'm glad that you feel like we covered stuff. So find your why for this character. I want to write about somebody who has a traumatic experience and then gets her life back, like super clear. Then figure out how you want that character to end up. Like in terms of, is it happy? Is it sad? Is it good? Is it bad? What message do I want that to show? And then all the rest is details, and you can sit and you can brainstorm different possibilities. What would a happy ending look like? What are all different possibilities? What would her motivation for changing look like? What are a bunch of different possibilities? And I would recommend talk to other people about them. Share and ask, does this seem believable? Write it one way and let it sit, and then come back to it, look at it, write it another way, and see how it strikes you. All right. I'm actually going to share in the comments to this video a link to a free resource that's up on the All Writers Welcome website, and it's creating compelling characters, and it's about what I talked about in this video, but also gives you a guide to, well, what about the secondary characters or the tertiary characters, like the people who just kind of show up once and they drive the cab, or they, stitch up the cat at the veterinary hospital. How do I build those characters? It's got some help, like a guide for all 3 levels of characters. So I'll post that link, and I hope you guys grab it if that's of interest to you. And if you would like to be featured, if you want your character in the hot seat for a live video, please also stick a comment in the comment stream, and then I'll let you know what I need from you in order to give you some suggestions. Thank you for watching, everybody. I'm going to say ta-ta for now, and I will see you next week. Bye.